Welcome, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Co-Girls on Air, a podcast exploring all things technology, female leadership, careers, education, and topics within the nonprofit sector. On this episode, we interviewed Jill Young, who is a social scientist at the U.S. Forest Service. Join Makayla and Jill to hear more of her story. Welcome, Jill. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Can you start by just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your career and your story?
Sure. My name is Jill Young. I've been here in the Flathead Valley about 3 years. Grew up in the United States Air Force, traveling all around the world and the United States. So it's been a fun and adventurous life so far. Let's see. Going back to growing up, I read a lot of books, and I took a coding class in my junior high school experience, and I didn't pay as much attention as I should have. So now that I look and see what you guys are up to, I'm like, I probably should have paid attention a little bit more because coding is really cool and it's everything.
Yep, it's everywhere.
But fast forward, I lived in Colorado for quite some time and finished undergraduate school from Florida Gulf Coast University, where I studied social sciences and social work, specifically working with different communities and environmental issues that they were facing. And it was a great experience in Florida Gulf Coast University. So highly suggest anybody listening to consider traveling abroad for your education. Let's see, fast forward from that, I attended graduate school at Western Colorado University in Gunnison, Colorado. And before that, I was teetering on the idea of what I wanted to do next in life, you know. I thought about clinical herbalism school and studying plants because plants are really special to me. I got accepted into the Colorado School of Clinical Herbalism, and I was listening into a lot of different podcasts and just thinking, okay, Jill, you got to study more than just plants and focus on something else other than your passion of plants. So,
Right.
I started looking at schools and researching what I wanted to learn and where I wanted to be. And at the time, I was on, still in Colorado, but I was on the other side of the divide and not in the mountains. And I love the mountains. So I looked up different schools and their programs, and I found Western Colorado University had a plethora of academia and STEAM programs, science, technology, engineering, art, and math. So, and there's a whole conglomerate of those intersecting. So I made some calls, went out to the school, met with some of the leaders, and they toured me around, and I just fell in love with the school and diving into some of the work they were doing. So made that jump and started full-time as a graduate student. And gosh, the plethora of opportunities in grad school was overwhelming. And just thinking financially, how could I afford this?
Right.
I completely funded my undergrad, and my mom was a single mom, so we didn't have a whole lot of funds to mess around with. And I was just like, okay, how can I afford this? So I started doing some more research on different programs and funding, and I just want to highly suggest if you're considering furthering your education, look at how you're going to fund that because it is expensive, but well worth the time and effort that it took to garner some of that money in the latter part of my career. So yeah, you name it. There's probably funding out there for that, especially science, technology, engineering, and math. So I got some funding, met with some really cool people in school, and had a field trip experience down in southwest Colorado where a severe wildfire came through, and I just took in the landscape and I thought, what happened to this forested stand?
Yeah.
It changed drastically, and the fire had came through 9 years prior, and so you would think that you'd see some seedlings and saplings growing in, and some trees of similar species, but it was just weedy herbaceous plants growing in, and it was a totally different landscape. And so the professor, Dr. Jonathan Koop, whom brought us on that wonderful field trip experience, was in need of a research assistant. And so we're just chatting it up and connecting, and he offered me a position, which was funded, and it was wonderful. And he gave me a lot of his time and energy, which I was so appreciative of. And I went to a lot of different conferences and just dove in as much as I could about fire ecology and what it means, because we're all affected by fire in some shape or form, whether positive or negative. It's here, it's part of the ecosystem, but what's happening? Always questioning. I think that's the biggest part of STEM careers, is questioning and just being constantly curious. So went to a lot of different conferences, met really cool people, and that added to more experience in travel. I got to go to Yukon, Canada, and do some remote sensing work, and met with some tribes there. Not as much on the fire side there, but they were definitely being impacted by fires just as much as we are here in the valley, especially. But we were looking at receding glaciers and got to get into a helicopter and just some really cool diving into whatever we wanted. And I met some great researchers whom coding and geospatial information systems, GIS, and all of these other really cool applications that I knew nothing about we're diving into. And so I got to learn a little tidbit of that and apply that, and still friends with some of those folks, and a lot of good research came out of that work there in Canada. And geez, a lot happened in between that time, and wrapped up grad school in 2020 of May. Not too many people were hiring around that time.
Yeah.
So if you can't tell, I've got adventure in my blood. So I thought, I got to go get out of here and go check out some other terrain. So I drove up through Yellowstone, up and saw the Flathead Lake and all of the water out here, and decided to move here. So I moved here, had a contracting job, and was able to work remotely wherever I wanted. And it was awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And got to recreate and learn as much as possible. And then I saw the Forest Service here, the Region 1, had a position open for a social scientist. And that was a bit of my background with the fire ecology side of things. Okay, so how are we translating this information as either coders or writers or researchers, what have you? How are we translating this? So we got to break this information down for people to understand. And this little thing called NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, that was enacted in 1969. And it's a really important policy for any environmental, anything happening in the Forest Service especially, but all public lands, doing checks and balances and environmental analyses. And a lot of that was driven here locally by fire mitigation, vegetation management projects.
Gotcha.
So I took an environmental law class in my graduate career, and I thought, I would never use this NEPA. Like, what? Are you kidding me? And my question when I was in environmental law class was, what's all that fire suppression red stuff? What is it doing to the environment that they're dropping down during suppression activities? It's got to be harming the environment in some shape or form. So I dove in a little bit of that. And then way fast forward, had a wonderful director of ecosystem planning at the region reach out to me, and she really held my hand through the hiring process of federal jobs and answered all of my questions. So key takeaway here, listeners, is to make connections, ask the questions, be driven and passionate no matter what it is. It may take you a few years, but you'll find something that is going to spark your love for whatever it is that you do. So, yeah, here we are now sitting here. A wonderful colleague of mine connected us. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's wonderful. So you kind of made the shift
throughout your career kind of ebb and flowed back into social sciences. What kind of surprised you when you really got back into it this last time?
Probably just being really conscientious of every little detail in what we do and connecting the dots of what's missing from certain projects and what do I want people to take away in the work that I do. And that's hopefully getting a better understanding of fire and its role in the ecosystem and getting some community buy-in, essentially getting the community, the public, to wrap their heads around a term fire ecology or good fire and trying to explain, hey, yes, we're going to have these projects in the landscape and it may seem wonky right now to put a fire in this area, but the long term, what are the long-term effects going to be? And it's hopefully minimizing the higher severity fires. So I think just the communication piece, the science communication of bridging all of that information that we do in public lands and putting it on paper and for people to have access to it has been huge.
Yeah. Well, is there a specific personality trait that you think someone would need to possess to really excel in that piece of the job?
A lot of reading and writing.
Gotcha.
Glazing over things. You will come between coding, and that's its own language. Just learning the language of what it is you're doing and being patient and present with it. I mentioned the term conscientious. I think that's the biggest personality trait is being conscious of what you're trying to relay to others,
right?
And being considerate of your audience.
Yeah. Well, I kind of want to switch gears here and talk about like what a day in your life looks like now. Like, what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
I have the wonderful opportunity of working from home. So get up, make my tea, throw my slippers on, get my dog outside, and turn on my computer. Sometimes I practice yoga before that and some breathing techniques just to clear the space. I have an oil diffuser, so it just doesn't have to be straight to the career and what we do. But it's how are you setting your space up for success? And I like to be really, really organized. I think that's another huge takeaway is keep organization. If that's in your file system, your calendar, all of the things. Keep it all organized. And seeing what I'm up to that day. And just there's tons of stuff that come my way throughout the day that it's always a fun challenge and I get to solve problems and sometimes not solve problems. And then you have to network and connect with those who know how to solve those problems. So that's been a huge part of my career the last couple of years since I joined the Forest Service was who knows what, whether it's GIS or some coding system like our statistical software, or I'm diving into being a librarian and learning this system called EndNote, where we house like 30,000 plus references.
Oh, wow.
So managing a big system like that can bring its challenges. So who knows the answers to those things? So being really, really nice and professional and giving thanks to the people that support you and sharing the reciprocity of connecting with each other.
Yeah. Well, and do you have a favorite piece of all the different aspects of your job?
Yeah, I get to work with some really great people. A lot of different specialists who have dedicated their career to either wildlife or hydrology systems, water systems, aquatics, which is our fish, and other water system creatures, little species that romp around in the water sheds. They get to do all the cool field work to gather the data that I get to look at and analyze from a different perspective and hopefully break that down. So just building those networks and connecting with a variety of interdisciplinary team is probably the coolest aspect of my job.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I kind of want to touch back on the fires.
Yeah.
At the time of this recording, you know, the LA fires are a big deal right now. After your time as a conference committee member on the International Association of Wildlife Fire, what's your take on how that's all going, and where do you think we can take it in the future from here?
That's a great question. I'm going to spin another cool podcast because we're having on a podcast right now. It's called Life with Fire.
Okay.
And this wildland firefighter, Amanda Monti, started the podcast and just connects with totally different people from all across the multidisciplinaries and gets them on the podcast talking about the nuances and the different issues, challenges, triumphs that fire people in fire, professional people, whatever they may be. They could be jumping out of they're called smoke jumpers, jumping out of a plane and fighting fires, or a fire ecologist who's collecting data and writing a 60-page manuscript. So there's a lot of work to be done in regards to land management and fire mitigation and fire management. And there's no one size fits all approach. I've been to a lot of different ecosystems. I got to go over to Siberia when I was in graduate school and work on fire. Yeah, fire over there. And they're not talking about that in the media or the news.
Right.
And I think that's another big takeaway is turn off the news because the news tends to amplify the issues and not tell the full story because it's what sells. And it's things like this cool podcast and other podcasts that can sometimes get to the nitty-gritty without adding an agenda or the fluff.
Right, yeah.
That's the news and the media outlets do. So, yeah, just always questioning things. And fire's history and the role of fire in the ecosystem is amazing. And so just diving into the history of fire and how our lands have been shaped by suppressing fires over history and even going back further to since time immemorial of removing fire from these key landscapes and how that's put us where we are.
Yeah.
I think we're doing good in regards to getting better at communicating with people about fire. And we're going to see smoke. And gosh, LA, it's January. And
I know.
The dry, the ecosystem challenges that our environment sees, and we're just in the way. There's this term called wildland urban interface, and people continuously move, and they want to be out of the city, and they want to live in the forest, but they've got to be cognizant of creating a defensible space if fires do come in. But it's inevitable, and it can be tragic, but at the same time, it can bring a lot of life too. So. Yeah, just always questioning and learning more about it, I think, is huge.
Yeah, definitely. Well, as we kind of wrap up here, do you have any piece of advice to somebody listening who is kind of looking into being a social scientist or anything else you'd like to say to our viewers?
Absolutely. Especially for younger people, just be really positive in whatever it is that fuels your inner fire. If it's coding or if it's the art of something, just be really passionate and know that what you're doing is exactly what you're supposed to be doing right now, and don't think too far ahead because you never know. I struggled to find a job that fulfilled my drive, and finally connecting with something bigger than myself, which is fire and some of those other concepts of water, fire, all the elements. I don't know. I think there's a lot of work out there and a lot of opportunity. Don't sell yourself short, and just be confident in your pursuits and endeavors and remain flexible. You're going to receive as much energy back as what you give in to what you're doing. I could have went through grad school and my undergrad or anything I've accomplished in life with a little grain of salt or with, just skating by. But is that who I am? No, no. You got to reach for the stars sometimes. And don't forget to travel. Get letters of recommendations from somebody who you know can speak highly to your abilities, and always maintaining your relationships, and being constantly curious.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
this was intriguing and very, very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show today.
I appreciate you so much. Thanks for all the listeners.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Next week on Co-Girls on Air,
try and find somebody that is willing to mentor and empower you and really latch on to them. And then remember to be that person, that same person for someone else.